Sarah Miller packed the last box into her small blue car and took a deep breath. After 2 years of fighting with her ex-husband and dealing with lawyers, she was finally free. The divorce was over, and she had enough money to buy a small house in a nice neighborhood. She was ready to start fresh. The house on Pine Street was perfect for her. It was a small 2-bedroom home with white walls and a red door. The front yard had green grass and a big oak tree that gave nice shade. The best part was the quiet street with friendly neighbors and clean sidewalks. Sarah had always dreamed of living in a place like this. When she first looked at the house, the real estate agent told her about the Homeowners Association. "It's called the Maple Creek Estates HOA," the woman said with a smile. "They just make sure everyone keeps their houses looking nice. Nothing too strict. Just basic rules about lawn care and house colors." Sarah nodded. She had lived in apartments for years, so she didn't know much about HOA rules. But keeping a nice yard sounded reasonable to her. She wanted to fit in with her new neighbors and be part of a good community. On moving day, Sarah was busy carrying boxes when she noticed a woman watching her from across the street. The woman stood at her front window holding back a white curtain. She was tall and thin with short gray hair. She wore a blue sweater and had her arms crossed. When Sarah waved hello, the woman just stared back and didn't wave. "That's odd," Sarah thought to herself, but she was too busy unpacking to worry about it. The woman across the street was Margaret Henderson, but everyone called her Maggie. She was 58 years old and had lived on Pine Street for 12 years. More importantly, she was the president of the Maple Creek Estates HOA. Maggie took her job very seriously. Too seriously, according to some neighbors. Maggie watched Sarah unload box after box. She noticed that Sarah's moving truck was parked a little bit on the grass. She saw that Sarah left her car door open for too long. She even counted how many trips Sarah made from the truck to the house. Maggie wrote notes on a small pad of paper about everything she saw. "New neighbors always need to learn the rules," Maggie said to herself. "I'll make sure this one knows how things work around here." The next morning, Sarah woke up early to start organizing her new home. She made coffee and sat by her kitchen window, looking out at the peaceful street. The morning sun made everything look golden and beautiful. She felt happy and hopeful about her new life. But when Sarah looked across the street, she saw Maggie again. This time, Maggie was standing in her front yard pretending to water her flowers. But Sarah could tell that Maggie was really watching her house. Maggie kept looking up from her watering can to stare at Sarah's windows. Sarah tried to ignore it and went back to unpacking. She had so much to do. She needed to find her dishes, set up her bedroom, and organize her clothes. She also wanted to plant some flowers in her front yard to make it look pretty. Around 10 in the morning, Sarah decided to take a break and get her mail. She walked to her mailbox at the end of her driveway and opened it up. Inside was a welcome packet from the HOA. There was also a note from Maggie. "Dear new resident," the note said in neat handwriting. "Welcome to Maple Creek Estates. I am Margaret Henderson, your HOA president. Please read all the rules carefully. We expect all residents to follow them exactly. If you have questions, you can call me at 555-0123. We run a tight ship here, and I'm sure you'll want to fit in." The note felt cold and unfriendly to Sarah. Most welcome notes said things like, "We're happy you're here," or "Let us know if you need anything." But this note sounded more like a warning than a welcome. Sarah looked at the thick packet of HOA rules. There were 20 pages of tiny print. Rules about what color you could paint your house. Rules about what kind of flowers you could plant. Rules about where to park your car. Rules about when to put out your trash cans and when to bring them back in. "Wow," Sarah said out loud. There are a lot of rules here. She decided to read them all carefully later. For now, she just wanted to finish unpacking and maybe introduce herself to some neighbors. That afternoon, Sarah was in her garage organizing boxes when she heard footsteps on her driveway. She looked up and saw Maggie walking toward her. Maggie carried a clipboard and wore the same blue sweater from the day before. "Hello," Maggie said in a flat voice. "I'm Margaret Henderson from across the street. I wanted to officially welcome you to the neighborhood. Hi, I'm Sarah Miller. It's so nice to meet you," Sarah said with a big smile. She wiped her dusty hands on her jeans and walked over to shake Maggie's hand. But Maggie didn't put out her hand to shake. Instead, she looked around Sarah's garage and front yard with a frown. "I see you haven't organized your garage yet," Maggie said, writing something on her clipboard. "The HOA rules say that garages should be kept neat and clean. Neighbors shouldn't be able to see messy boxes and clutter." Sarah's smile faded a little. "Oh, I just moved in yesterday. I'm still unpacking everything. Yes, well, the rules don't make exceptions for new residents, Maggie replied. Also, I noticed your car was parked on the grass yesterday during your move. That's not allowed either. The grass is for decoration, not parking. Sarah felt confused and a little upset. She had been so excited about her new home, and now she was getting in trouble for things she didn't even know were wrong. I'm sorry, Sarah said. I didn't know about the parking rule. The moving truck was so big that my car had to go somewhere. I'll be more careful. Maggie wrote more notes on her clipboard. I also see you have some boxes on your front porch. Those need to be moved inside or thrown away by tomorrow. We don't allow storage on front porches. Okay, I'll move them today, Sarah said. She was starting to feel frustrated, but she wanted to be a good neighbor. Good. I'm sure you'll learn all the rules soon enough, Maggie said. Then she looked directly at Sarah with cold eyes. We've worked very hard to make this neighborhood perfect. Everyone needs to do their part to keep it that way. After Maggie walked back to her house, Sarah stood in her driveway feeling overwhelmed. She had thought moving to a nice neighborhood would be relaxing and fun. But now she felt like she was being watched and judged for everything she did. Sarah looked across the street and saw Maggie back at her window, watching again. This time Sarah didn't wave. Sarah thought things would get better after her first meeting with Maggie. She moved all the boxes from her front porch and organized her garage. She even read through the entire HOA rulebook twice to make sure she understood everything. But 2 weeks later, her first violation notice arrived in the mail. The white envelope had official HOA violation notice, printed in big red letters across the front. Sarah's hand shook a little as she opened it. Inside was a form with several boxes checked off and Maggie's signature at the bottom. Violation. Trash receptacle left curbside past designated collection time. It read. Date of violation Tuesday, May 15th. Time observed 6:47 p.m. According to HOA Rule Section 12.3, all trash containers must be returned to storage within 4 hours of collection. This violation occurred 47 minutes past the deadline. Sarah stared at the paper in shock. She remembered that Tuesday. She had worked late at her new job and didn't get home until 6:30. She had rushed to bring in her trash can as soon as she saw it. But apparently it wasn't fast enough for Maggie. The notice continued. First offense results in written warning. Second offense, $50 fine. Third offense, $100 fine and potential HOA board review. At the bottom, Maggie had written a personal note in her neat handwriting. New residents must understand that rules exist for everyone's benefit. Please be more responsible going forward. Sarah felt her face get hot with anger. 47 minutes late with her trash can, and she was getting an official violation notice. It seemed crazy and unfair. She decided to walk across the street and talk to Maggie about it. Maybe they could work things out like reasonable neighbors. Maggie answered her door wearing a green cardigan and holding a cup of tea. Yes, she said, not inviting Sarah inside. Hi, Maggie. I got the violation notice about my trash can, Sarah said, holding up the paper. I was wondering if we could talk about it. I was only a few minutes late because I had to work overtime. Maggie's face didn't change. The rules don't care why you were late. They only care that you were late. But it was less than an hour, Sarah said, and it was my first time making a mistake. Don't you think a warning would be better than an official violation? That is a warning, Maggie replied. The next time will cost you $50. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Maggie, I really want to be a good neighbor. Can you please give me some grace as I learn all the rules? I promise I'll do better. Maggie looked at Sarah like she was looking at something unpleasant. Grace is what got this neighborhood into trouble before I became HOA president. The previous president was too soft on rule breakers. Property values dropped and the whole place looked messy. I've spent 5 years fixing those problems. I understand you want to keep the neighborhood nice, Sarah said. But maybe we could... There's nothing to discuss, Maggie interrupted. Follow the rules and there won't be any problems. Then she closed the door in Sarah's face. 3 days later, another violation notice arrived. This time it was for Sarah's mailbox being positioned at an improper angle relative to the street. Sarah went outside and looked at her mailbox. It looked exactly the same as everyone else's mailbox. She couldn't see any difference at all. But when she looked closer, she noticed that her mailbox post was leaning slightly to the left. It was barely noticeable, maybe tilted 2 or 3 degrees. Sarah couldn't believe someone would write a violation for something so small. The weekend brought violation notice number 3. This one was about Sarah's garden gnome. Sarah had bought the cute little gnome at a garden store and put it next to her front steps. It was only 8 inches tall and painted bright colors. The gnome held a tiny fishing pole and had a friendly smile. Sarah thought it was cheerful and welcoming. But according to the violation notice, the gnome was inappropriate lawn decoration, not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetic standards. The rule book section mentioned lawn ornaments of questionable taste and gave the HOA board power to decide what decorations were acceptable. Sarah was getting frustrated and angry. She had spent her whole savings to buy this house and moved to what she thought was a friendly neighborhood. Instead, she felt like she was living in a prison with Maggie as the warden. That evening, Sarah's neighbor Tom knocked on her door. Tom was a friendly man in his 60s who lived in the house next to Sarah's. He had gray hair and kind eyes, and he always waved when he saw Sarah outside. "Hey there, Sarah," Tom said with a concerned look. "I heard you've been having some trouble with the HOA." "Word travels fast around here," Sarah said with a tired smile. "Mind if I come in for a minute?" Tom asked. "I think we should talk." Sarah invited Tom into her living room and made him a cup of coffee. They sat on her couch and Tom looked serious. "Listen, Sarah, I've lived here for 8 years," Tom said. "I've seen what Maggie does to people she doesn't like. And for some reason she's decided she doesn't like you." "But why?" Sarah asked. "I've tried to be friendly. I've followed all the rules except for those tiny mistakes." Tom shook his head. "It's not about the rules. Maggie uses the rules as weapons. She's driven away 4 families in the past 3 years using the same tactics." Sarah felt a chill run down her back. "What do you mean?" "The violation notices are just the beginning," Tom explained. "She'll find more and more things wrong with your house. She'll take pictures and document everything. Then she'll start calling you at work and bothering your employer." "She can do that?" Sarah asked. "She's done it before," Tom said sadly. "The Rodriguez family used to live where the Johnsons live now. Maggie made their lives so miserable they moved away. Same thing happened to the Patel family and the Williams family." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "Why doesn't anyone stop her?" "Most people are too scared," Tom admitted. "She has a lot of power as HOA president, and she knows all the rules better than anyone else. People just try to stay out of her way." "But that's not fair," Sarah said. "Someone should stand up to her." Tom looked at her with worry in his eyes. "Be careful, Sarah. I like you and I want you to stay. But Maggie can make your life very difficult if you fight her." After Tom left, Sarah sat alone in her living room thinking about what he had said. She looked out her front window and saw Maggie's house across the street. All the lights were on, and she could see Maggie's shadow moving around inside. Sarah felt trapped and scared. She had worked so hard to build a new life after her divorce. She had saved every penny to buy this house. Now it felt like all of that might be threatened by one angry woman who seemed to enjoy making other people miserable. But Sarah also felt something else growing inside her chest. Determination. She wasn't the type of person to back down from a bully. She had survived a difficult marriage and a messy divorce. She wasn't going to let Maggie Henderson drive her away from her dream home. That night, Sarah started a notebook. She wrote down every interaction she'd had with Maggie, every violation notice, and every detail she could remember. If Maggie wanted to play games with rules and documentation, Sarah would be ready to play too. She looked out her window one more time before going to bed. Maggie was still awake, still moving around her house like a restless ghost. Sarah closed her curtains and tried to sleep. But she kept thinking about Tom's warning and wondering what Maggie would do next. Sarah decided she wasn't going to let Maggie push her around anymore. If Maggie wanted to follow every tiny rule, then Sarah would learn every tiny rule too. She spent her weekend reading through the HOA handbook one more time, taking notes and highlighting important sections. That's when she found something interesting. According to Section 15.4, residents were allowed to have vegetable gardens in their backyards as long as they were neat, well-maintained, and not visible from the street. Sarah had always wanted to grow her own tomatoes and peppers. Now seemed like the perfect time to start. On Saturday morning, Sarah went to the garden store and bought seeds, soil, and small wooden stakes. She planned her garden carefully in her backyard, making sure it couldn't be seen from the street. She planted 3 rows of tomatoes, 2 rows of peppers, and 1 row of herbs. Everything was organized and tidy, just like the rules said. Sarah felt proud of her little garden. It reminded her of the vegetable garden her grandmother had when Sarah was a child. Working in the dirt made her feel peaceful and hopeful about her new home, but her good feelings didn't last long. Monday morning brought another violation notice. This time, Maggie claimed that Sarah's car was parked improperly in the driveway, extending beyond the designated parking area by approximately 2 inches. Sarah went outside and measured her driveway with a tape measure. Her car's front bumper was exactly 1 3/4 inches past the edge of her driveway. Not even 2 full inches. Someone would have to get down on their hands and knees with a ruler to notice such a tiny difference. That afternoon, Sarah saw Maggie walking slowly past her house, taking pictures with a digital camera. Maggie stopped at different angles and took photos of Sarah's mailbox, her front door, her windows, and her car. She even took pictures of Sarah's trash cans, which were properly stored in the garage. Sarah watched from her kitchen window, feeling angry and uncomfortable. It felt like being stalked by someone who was looking for any excuse to cause trouble. Tuesday brought more problems. Sarah came home from work to find a nasty note taped to her front door. The note was written on Maggie's personal stationery, not official HOA letterhead. "Your garden gnome is still visible from the street and remains in violation of neighborhood standards," the note said. "Remove it immediately or face additional fines. Also, I noticed you've been receiving multiple packages delivered to your home. The HOA rules limit residential deliveries to prevent commercial activity. I'll be monitoring your delivery situation closely." Sarah was confused about the delivery comment. She had only ordered a few things online since moving in: some curtains, a lamp, and gardening supplies. Normal things that any person might buy. How was that different from anyone else getting packages? She decided to call Maggie and ask for clarification. "Henderson residence." Maggie answered the phone in a cold voice. "Hi, Maggie. This is Sarah from across the street. I got your note about packages and I'm confused about what rule I'm breaking." "Multiple daily deliveries suggest commercial activity," Maggie replied. "The HOA doesn't allow residents to run businesses from their homes." "But I'm not running a business," Sarah said. "I just ordered some normal household things online." "That's what they all say," Maggie replied with a nasty tone. "I have my eye on you, Sarah Miller. One wrong move and I'll have you investigated for zoning violations." Then Maggie hung up the phone. Sarah sat in her kitchen feeling shocked and angry. Maggie was clearly trying to intimidate her and make her life miserable for no good reason, but Sarah wasn't going to give up. That evening, Sarah was watering her vegetable garden when her neighbor Tom came over to chat. "How's the garden coming along?" Tom asked, looking at her neat rows of plants. "Really well," Sarah said. "The tomato plants are already growing. I made sure to follow all the HOA rules about placement and maintenance." Tom looked worried. "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I saw Maggie walking around your backyard this morning while you were at work." Sarah's hands stopped moving. "What do you mean, walking around my backyard?" "I was getting my mail when I saw her go through the gate on the side of your house," Tom explained. "She spent about 10 minutes back there taking pictures of everything. When she saw me watching, she pretended like she was checking the fence line for property boundary issues." Sarah felt a cold chill run through her body. "She was trespassing on my property?" "Technically, she might claim she was checking HOA property boundaries," Tom said. "But it looked like snooping to me." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The idea of Maggie sneaking around her backyard while she wasn't home made her feel violated and unsafe. She got up and checked all her doors and windows to make sure they were locked. The next morning, Sarah decided to install a security camera system. She went to the electronics store and bought 2 small cameras that she could set up to watch her front and backyards. If Maggie was going to spy on her, then Sarah would have proof of what was really happening. Setting up the cameras took most of her Saturday. Sarah wasn't very good with technology, but she followed the instructions carefully. She positioned one camera to watch her driveway and front yard, and another to watch her backyard and garden. The cameras were connected to an app on her phone, so she could check them from anywhere. Sarah felt better knowing she would have evidence if Maggie tried anything suspicious. She didn't have to wait long. Sunday night around 2:30 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with an alert from the security app. Someone was moving around in her backyard. Sarah grabbed her phone and opened the camera app, her heart beating fast. On the screen, she could see a person wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap walking through her garden. The person was carrying something in their hands and moving carefully between the vegetable rows. Sarah watched in shock as the person began pulling up her tomato plants and throwing them on the ground. Then they moved to the pepper plants and did the same thing. In just a few minutes, weeks of Sarah's hard work was destroyed. The person stepped on the plants and kicked dirt around, making a complete mess of the garden. Then they picked up a garden tool and used it to destroy the wooden stakes that held up the tomato plants. When the person turned toward the camera, Sarah could see their face clearly in the infrared light. It was Maggie Henderson. Sarah watched as Maggie looked around the backyard, making sure she had destroyed everything. Then Maggie picked up one of the tomato plants and threw it over the fence into another neighbor's yard. As Maggie walked toward the gate to leave, she looked directly at Sarah's house and smiled. It was a mean, satisfied smile that made Sarah feel sick to her stomach. The whole attack lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Sarah's beautiful vegetable garden was completely ruined. Sarah saved the video to her phone and called the police. But when the dispatcher heard that it was a neighbor dispute about a garden, they said they would send an officer in the morning to take a report. Sarah spent the rest of the night awake, watching the security cameras and feeling angry and violated. She had tried to follow all the rules. She had tried to be a good neighbor, but Maggie had escalated things to actual criminal behavior. In the morning, Sarah went outside to look at the damage in person. It was even worse than it had looked on the camera. Destroyed plants were scattered everywhere. The soil was torn up and mixed with broken stakes and garden tools. Weeks of work and money wasted because of one person's cruelty. But now Sarah had something she didn't have before. Proof. When the police officer arrived, Sarah showed him the security camera video. The officer watched the footage and shook his head. "Well, this is pretty clear evidence of vandalism and trespassing," he said. "Do you want to press charges?" Sarah looked across the street at Maggie's house. Maggie was standing at her front window, watching the police car in Sarah's driveway. When she saw Sarah looking back at her, Maggie smiled that same mean smile from the night before. "Yes," Sarah said firmly. "I want to press charges." Officer Martinez took Sarah's statement and watched the security camera video 3 times. He made notes about the damage and took photos of the destroyed garden. Sarah gave him copies of all the violation notices and the threatening note Maggie had left on her door. "This is a clear case of vandalism and criminal trespass," Officer Martinez said. "The video evidence is excellent. We'll file charges against Ms. Henderson today." Sarah felt relieved. Finally, someone in authority was taking Maggie's behavior seriously. "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "We'll go talk to Ms. Henderson and get her side of the story," the officer explained. "But with this video evidence, she'll likely be arrested and charged. You'll need to come to the station later to sign the formal complaint." After Officer Martinez left, Sarah cleaned up her destroyed garden. She felt sad looking at the broken plants and ruined soil, but she also felt something new, hope. Maybe now Maggie would face consequences for her actions. Sarah was wrong about what would happen next. 2 hours later, she was back at work when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her boss's name. "Sarah, I need you to come to my office right away," Mr. Peterson said. He sounded serious and upset. Sarah felt worried as she walked to her boss's office. Mr. Peterson was usually friendly and relaxed, but today he looked uncomfortable. "Sarah, please sit down," he said. "I got a very strange phone call this morning. Someone named Margaret Henderson called claiming that you've been harassing her and making threats. She said you're some kind of dangerous person who shouldn't be trusted around other people." Sarah's mouth fell open in shock. "Mr. Peterson, that's not true at all. She's the one who's been harassing me. She destroyed my garden last night and I have it all on video. She also claimed that you're running some kind of illegal business from your home." Mr. Peterson continued. "She said you get multiple packages every day and might be selling drugs or stolen goods." Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "That's completely crazy. I ordered some curtains and garden supplies online." "That's it." Mr. Peterson looked relieved. "I figured it was probably something like that. But Sarah, I have to ask, are you having problems with your neighbors?" This woman sounded very upset and very convinced that you were dangerous. Sarah told her boss the whole story. She explained about the violation notices, the harassment, and the garden destruction. Mr. Peterson listened carefully and shook his head. "This sounds like a nightmare," he said. "I'm sorry you're going through this. But Sarah, I need you to keep your personal problems from affecting your work. If this woman keeps calling here, it could become a problem for the company." Sarah felt embarrassed and frustrated. Now Maggie was trying to ruin her job too. "I understand," Sarah said. "I'm handling it through the police." Hopefully it will be resolved soon. But when Sarah got home from work, things got much worse. There were 2 police cars in her driveway. Officers were waiting for her with serious expressions on their faces. "Sarah Miller?" one officer asked. "Yes, that's me," Sarah replied, feeling confused and scared. "You're under arrest for making terroristic threats and criminal harassment," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. Sarah felt like the world was spinning around her. "What? That's impossible. I'm the victim here. I filed a complaint this morning about my neighbor destroying my garden." "Ma'am, we need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back," the officer said firmly. "Wait, please," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "There's been a mistake. I have video evidence that shows my neighbor Margaret Henderson vandalizing my property. Officer Martinez was here this morning. He saw the evidence." "Ma'am, Margaret Henderson filed a complaint saying that you threatened to kill her and burn down her house," the second officer explained. "She has witnesses who heard you making these threats. We have a warrant for your arrest." Sarah felt like she was in a nightmare. "That's not true. I never said anything like that." "She's lying." But the officers put the handcuffs on Sarah anyway and walked her to the police car. As they drove away, Sarah saw Maggie standing at her front window watching with that same mean smile. At the police station, Sarah sat in a small room with gray walls and a metal table. She felt scared and confused. A detective named Williams came in with a thick folder. "Ms. Miller, you're in serious trouble," Detective Williams said. "Margaret Henderson says you threatened her life yesterday afternoon. She has 2 witnesses who heard you screaming threats at her from your front yard." "That's completely false," Sarah said. "I was at work yesterday afternoon. I have coworkers who can prove it. And I've never screamed at anyone in my life." Detective Williams opened his folder and pulled out a paper. "According to this report, you told Ms. Henderson that you would make her pay and that you would burn everything she cares about. You also allegedly said you would put her in the ground if she didn't leave you alone." Sarah felt sick to her stomach. "I never said any of those things. This is all made up. She's the one who's been harassing me for weeks. Ms. Henderson also reports that you've been stalking her, taking pictures of her house and leaving threatening notes on her car," the detective continued. "What?" Sarah said, her voice getting louder. "That's exactly what she's been doing to me. She's been taking pictures of my house and leaving nasty notes on my door. I have proof." Detective Williams looked skeptical. "Where's this proof?" Sarah told him about the violation notices, the security cameras, and the video of Maggie destroying her garden. The detective listened but didn't seem very interested. "The garden incident is a separate issue," he said. "Right now we're dealing with the threats you made against Ms. Henderson's life." "But I didn't make any threats," Sarah insisted. "Can't you see that she's making this up to get back at me for filing charges against her?" The detective looked at his papers again. "Ms. Henderson's witnesses are very credible people. One is a retired school principal, and the other is a nurse. They both say they heard you making these threats." Sarah felt hopeless. Maggie had somehow gotten people to lie for her, and the police believed them instead of Sarah. After 3 hours of questioning, Sarah was allowed to call a lawyer. She used her savings to hire an attorney named Rebecca Santos, who came to the police station right away. "This is clearly a revenge complaint," Ms. Santos told the detective. "My client filed charges against Ms. Henderson this morning for vandalizing her property. Now suddenly Ms. Henderson claims my client made threats. The timing is very suspicious." Detective Williams looked annoyed. "The timing doesn't matter. We have witnesses who heard the threats." Ms. Santos asked to see the witness statements. After reading them, she looked concerned. "Sarah, these people claim you were in your front yard at 3:30 p.m. yesterday, screaming threats across the street," she said. "Where were you at that time?" "I was at work," Sarah said. "I didn't get home until after 6 p.m. My coworkers can prove it." Ms. Santos smiled for the first time. "Then we have a problem with these witness statements, don't we, Detective?" It took 2 more hours, but finally Sarah's coworkers confirmed that she had been at work during the time of the alleged threats. The witnesses had obviously lied, but they claimed they might have been confused about the day. The charges against Sarah were dropped, but she had to spend the night in jail before her lawyer could get her released. When she finally got home the next morning, she felt exhausted and humiliated. Worst of all, she saw that Maggie had made sure all the neighbors knew about the arrest. There were people standing in their driveways whispering and pointing at Sarah's house. Sarah realized that even though the charges were dropped, Maggie had succeeded in damaging her reputation. Her neighbors now thought of her as the crazy woman who got arrested for making threats. But Sarah also realized something else. Maggie had made a big mistake by lying to the police and getting other people to lie too. Now Sarah had proof that Maggie was willing to commit crimes to hurt her, and Sarah was done being the victim. After spending a night in jail for crimes she didn't commit, Sarah came home angry and determined. She wasn't going to let Maggie destroy her life without a fight. If Maggie wanted to play dirty games, then Sarah would learn to play them better. The first thing Sarah did was call her lawyer, Rebecca Santos, to discuss what had happened. "The false police report is actually good news for us," Ms. Santos explained over the phone. "Filing a false police report is a felony in this state. And getting witnesses to lie to police is another felony called suborning perjury." "But how do we prove they lied?" Sarah asked. "We already proved you were at work when they claimed you made the threats," Ms. Santos replied. "That means either they lied or they're completely unreliable witnesses. Either way, it helps our case." Sarah felt a little better, but she knew she needed more evidence. She decided to start documenting everything Maggie did, just like Maggie had been doing to her. Sarah bought a small notebook and started writing down every interaction, every violation notice, and every strange thing she observed. She also upgraded her security camera system to cover more areas around her house. But Sarah's most important decision was to start talking to her neighbors. If Maggie had been harassing other families for years, then Sarah needed to find those people and get their stories. Sarah started with Tom, her friendly neighbor who had warned her about Maggie from the beginning. "Tom, you mentioned that Maggie drove away other families before me," Sarah said when she saw him working in his yard. "Can you tell me more about that?" Tom looked around nervously to make sure Maggie wasn't watching. There was the Rodriguez family who used to live in the blue house on the corner. Maggie made their lives miserable for 2 years before they finally gave up and moved. "What did she do to them?" Sarah asked. "Same thing she's doing to you," Tom said. "Constant violation notices, harassment, false complaints to the city. She even called Mr. Rodriguez's boss and claimed he was running an illegal auto repair business because he changed his own oil in his driveway." Sarah felt angry but also relieved to know she wasn't the only victim. "Are they still in town? Could I talk to them?" Tom nodded. "They live about 10 miles away now. I have their phone number." Maria Rodriguez still gets upset when she talks about what happened here. That evening, Sarah called Maria Rodriguez. When Sarah explained who she was and why she was calling, Maria became very emotional. "Oh my God, she's doing it to someone else," Maria said, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. That woman is evil." "Can you tell me what happened to your family?" Sarah asked. Maria told a story that sounded exactly like Sarah's experience. It started with minor violation notices and escalated to harassment, false complaints, and attempts to damage her husband's reputation at work. The worst part was when she called Child Protective Services and claimed we were neglecting our children, Maria said, crying. "They came to our house and investigated us for weeks. Our kids were scared and confused. We had done nothing wrong, but the investigation was humiliating." Sarah felt sick hearing this. "That's terrible. Did you ever report her to the police?" "We tried," Maria said, "but she was always careful to stay just inside the law. And she was the HOA president, so people believed her instead of us. Finally, we just couldn't take it anymore. We sold our house and moved away." "Would you be willing to write down what happened to you?" Sarah asked. "I'm building a case against her." "Yes, absolutely," Maria replied. "I'll do anything to help stop her from hurting more families." Over the next few weeks, Sarah contacted the other families that Tom had mentioned. The Patel family, the Williams family, and the Chen family all had similar stories. Maggie had used the same tactics against all of them. Harassment through violation notices, false complaints to employers, and attempts to damage their reputations in the neighborhood. Each family agreed to write detailed statements about what Maggie had done to them. Sarah was building a strong case that showed a clear pattern of harassment and abuse of power. But Sarah also discovered something else that shocked her. When she researched Maggie's background, she found out that this wasn't the first neighborhood where Maggie had caused problems. Sarah found online records showing that Maggie had lived in 3 different neighborhoods over the past 15 years. In each place, she had quickly become involved in the homeowners association and had gained power and control. More importantly, Sarah found court records showing that Maggie had been sued twice in her previous neighborhoods for harassment and abuse of power. Both lawsuits had been settled out of court with confidential agreements, which explained why people in Sarah's neighborhood didn't know about Maggie's history. Sarah also learned that Maggie wasn't even legally qualified to be HOA president. According to the neighborhood's original HOA charter, the president had to be elected by all residents. But Maggie had been appointing herself to the position year after year without holding proper elections. This gave Sarah an idea. If Maggie wasn't the legitimate HOA president, then all of her violation notices and harassment activities weren't official HOA business. They were just the actions of a private citizen who was pretending to have authority she didn't actually possess. Sarah called a meeting with Ms. Santos to share all the evidence she had collected. "This is excellent work," the lawyer said, looking through the witness statements and court records. "You've documented a clear pattern of criminal harassment that goes back many years, and the fact that she's not the legitimate HOA president makes her actions even more serious. What can we do with this information?" Sarah asked. "We can file criminal charges for multiple felonies," Ms. Santos replied. "Harassment, stalking, filing false police reports, and possibly even fraud for pretending to have authority as HOA president. We can also file a civil lawsuit for damages." Sarah felt excited but also nervous. Will it work? She seems to have a lot of people who support her. "The evidence speaks for itself," Ms. Santos said, "and once other neighbors see that she's not the legitimate HOA president, I think you'll find that her support disappears quickly." That weekend, Sarah decided to test this theory. She printed copies of the HOA charter and the election requirements, along with proof that Maggie had never been properly elected. Then she went door to door to talk to her neighbors. The first few conversations were awkward. Some neighbors seemed scared to talk about Maggie or didn't want to get involved. But when Sarah showed them the documents proving that Maggie had been illegally claiming authority for years, their attitudes changed. "Wait, you're telling me that all those violation notices weren't official?" asked Janet, the woman who lived 2 houses down from Sarah. "That's right," Sarah replied. "Maggie has been pretending to be the HOA president, but she was never legally elected to the position." Janet looked angry. "She made me repaint my entire house last year because she said the color was wrong. That cost me $3,000. By the end of the weekend, Sarah had talked to most of her neighbors. Many of them had stories about Maggie's abuse of power, and they were angry to learn that she had been acting without proper authority. Even better, several neighbors agreed to help Sarah organize a proper HOA election and remove Maggie from any position of power. But Sarah's investigation had one more surprise. When she was reviewing her security camera footage from the past few weeks, she noticed something strange. On several nights, Maggie had been walking around the neighborhood at 2 or 3 a.m., taking pictures of different houses and looking through windows. Sarah realized that Maggie's harassment campaign wasn't limited to her alone. Maggie was spying on multiple neighbors and looking for violations or other information she could use to control people. This was the final piece of evidence Sarah needed. Maggie wasn't just harassing Sarah. She was conducting a campaign of intimidation against the entire neighborhood. It was time to take action. Sarah met with Detective Johnson, a different officer than the one who had arrested her. She brought all her evidence, witness statements from the previous families, security camera footage, proof of Maggie's illegal claim to HOA authority, and documentation of years of harassment. Detective Johnson listened carefully as Sarah explained everything. He watched the security video of Maggie destroying the garden and looked through all the violation notices and threatening messages. "This is a very strong case," Detective Johnson said. "Ms. Henderson has clearly been committing multiple crimes over several years. We have enough evidence for charges of harassment, stalking, vandalism, trespassing, filing false police reports, and fraud." "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "We'll get arrest warrants for all these charges," the detective explained. "Given the seriousness and the pattern of behavior, she'll likely be held on a substantial bail amount." Sarah felt nervous but excited. Finally, Maggie would face real consequences for her actions. "There's just one thing I want to warn you about," Detective Johnson continued. "People like Ms. Henderson often escalate their behavior when they feel cornered. You should be extra careful and keep your security cameras running." Sarah thanked the detective and went home to wait. She didn't have to wait long. That same evening, Sarah's security system alerted her to movement in her backyard. She opened the app on her phone and saw a figure dressed in dark clothes moving around near her house. But this time, the person wasn't just destroying plants. They were carrying something that looked like a can and pouring liquid on the side of Sarah's house. Sarah's blood ran cold when she realized what was happening. Someone was pouring gasoline on her house, probably planning to set it on fire. Sarah immediately called 911 while watching the security footage on her phone. The person was working quickly, pouring gasoline along the foundation of the house and up toward the windows. Juan, what's your emergency?
Someone is pouring gasoline on my house, Sarah said, trying to stay calm.
I think they're going to try to burn it down. I'm watching it happen on my security cameras right now. Are you inside the house? The dispatcher asked. Yes, I'm upstairs in my bedroom. Get out of the house immediately and wait for police at a safe distance, the dispatcher instructed. Officers are on their way. Sarah grabbed her phone and keys and ran downstairs. She could smell gasoline when she got to the first floor, which confirmed that her security cameras were showing something real and dangerous. Sarah ran out her front door and across the street to Tom's house. She pounded on his door and he answered in his pajamas. Sarah, what's wrong? Tom asked, seeing the panic on her face. Someone is trying to burn down my house, Sarah said, breathing hard. The police are coming. Tom immediately let Sarah inside and called his wife. Together, they watched from Tom's front window as police cars arrived with their lights flashing. The officers surrounded Sarah's house with bright flashlights and started searching the backyard. Within a few minutes, Sarah heard shouting and saw the officers chasing someone through the yard. They caught the person near Sarah's back fence and wrestled them to the ground. When the officers turned on their flashlights, Sarah could see the person's face clearly. It was Maggie Henderson, wearing all black clothes and a ski mask pulled up on her head. Sarah watched in shock as the police handcuffed Maggie and walked her to a patrol car. Maggie was struggling and yelling, but Sarah couldn't hear what she was saying from inside Tom's house. Detective Johnson came to Tom's door about 30 minutes later. Ms. Miller. We caught Ms. Henderson red-handed, he said. She was carrying a gas can and matches when we arrested her. The fire department is checking your house to make sure it's safe. Sarah felt overwhelming relief mixed with anger. She was really going to burn down my house? It looks that way, Detective Johnson replied. She poured gasoline along the entire side of your house. If you hadn't seen her on the cameras and called us so quickly, you could have been killed. The fire department confirmed that Sarah's house was safe after they cleaned up all the gasoline. But Sarah couldn't stop shaking when she realized how close she had come to being burned alive in her own home. This changes everything, Detective Johnson explained. Attempted arson is a very serious felony. Combined with all the other charges, Ms. Henderson is looking at several years in prison. Tom and his wife let Sarah stay at their house that night. Sarah was too scared and shaken up to be alone in her house, even though the police said it was safe. The next morning, Sarah learned that Maggie had been charged with attempted arson, criminal trespass, vandalism, harassment, stalking, filing false police reports, and fraud. Her bail was set at $50,000. She's definitely going to prison, Ms. Santos told Sarah over the phone. People who try to burn down occupied houses don't get sympathy from judges and juries. But the most shocking part was still to come. That afternoon, Sarah received a phone call from a man who introduced himself as Robert Henderson, Maggie's husband. Ms. Miller, I want to apologize for my wife's behavior, Robert said in a tired voice. I had no idea how bad things had gotten until the police arrested her last night. Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never met Robert and rarely saw him around the neighborhood. I've been working out of state for the past 2 years, Robert continued. I only came home on weekends and Maggie always acted normal when I was there. I didn't realize she was harassing the neighbors or breaking the law. It's been going on for a long time, Sarah said carefully. I know that now, Robert replied. The police showed me all the evidence. I'm horrified and ashamed. Maggie needs serious help and I'm going to make sure she gets it. Sarah appreciated Robert's apology, but she was still angry about everything that had happened. The reason I'm calling, Robert continued, is to ask you a favor. Maggie can't make her bail, and our family savings are tied up in legal fees. I know this is a lot to ask, but would you consider helping us pay her bail? As a gesture of good faith between neighbors? Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. You want me to pay bail for the woman who tried to burn down my house? I understand it sounds crazy, Robert said, but Maggie is my wife of 30 years. She's sick and needs help. If she stays in jail, she won't be able to get the mental health treatment she needs. Sarah felt angry that Robert was trying to make her feel guilty. Your wife tried to kill me last night. She poured gasoline on my house while I was sleeping inside. If I hadn't seen her on my security cameras, I would be dead right now. I know, and I'm so sorry, Robert said. That's why I think she needs professional help instead of just sitting in jail. Sarah took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Robert, I understand that you love your wife, but she has been terrorizing me and other families for years. She destroyed my property, lied to police, and tried to burn down my house. I will not help her get out of jail. Please think about it, Robert said. Maggie knows she made mistakes. She wants to apologize and make things right. After Robert hung up, Sarah sat in her living room feeling amazed at the request. The woman who had tried to kill her wanted Sarah to pay for her freedom, but Sarah's amazement turned to shock when she checked her mail that evening. Inside was a handwritten letter from Maggie herself, mailed from the county jail. Sarah stared at the envelope in her hands. Her name and address were written in Maggie's neat handwriting, with county jail as the return address. Sarah couldn't believe that Maggie was writing to her from jail, especially after trying to burn down her house. With shaking hands, Sarah opened the letter and began to read. Dear Sarah, the letter began. I hope this letter finds you well. I am writing to you from jail to explain my side of the story and ask for your help during this difficult time. Sarah felt her anger growing as she continued, reading. I want you to know that I never meant to hurt you or damage your property. Everything that happened was a big misunderstanding. I was only trying to protect our neighborhood and maintain the high standards that make our community special. Sarah couldn't believe what she was reading. Maggie was calling attempted arson a misunderstanding. The letter continued. I realize now that some of my actions may have seemed harsh, but I was only doing my job as HOA president. Every violation notice I sent was based on real problems that needed to be fixed. I was trying to help you become a better neighbor. A better neighbor? Sarah said out loud to herself. She tried to kill me. But the letter got even worse. The incident with the gasoline was not what it looked like. I was actually trying to help you by cleaning up some spilled chemicals that I noticed near your house. I was wearing dark clothes because I didn't want to disturb you so late at night. I never intended to start a fire or hurt anyone. Sarah felt sick reading Maggie's lies. The security camera footage clearly showed Maggie pouring gasoline all around the house, not cleaning up spilled chemicals. I understand that the police have charged me with serious crimes, but I believe this whole situation has been blown out of proportion. A simple neighbor dispute has turned into something much bigger because of misunderstandings and false evidence. Sarah realized that Maggie was planning to claim innocence in court and deny everything, even though there was clear video evidence of her crimes. The letter continued with the most shocking part. Sarah, I am asking you to help me during this difficult time. My bail is $50,000, which my family cannot afford right now. As neighbors who have had our differences, I think we should work together to resolve this situation. Sarah read the sentence 3 times to make sure she was understanding it correctly. Maggie was actually asking her to pay the bail. I believe that if you pay my bail and allow me to come home, we can work out our differences like reasonable adults. I am willing to apologize for any misunderstandings and even pay for the damage to your garden. All I ask is that you drop the criminal charges and give me a chance to make things right. Sarah felt her hands shaking with anger. Maggie was trying to negotiate her way out of serious criminal charges as if this was just a simple disagreement between neighbors. If you help me now, I promise that all the problems between us will stop. I will resign from my position as HOA president and leave you alone. We can even be friends if you give me the chance to show you that I'm not a bad person. But then the letter took a threatening turn. However, if you refuse to help me and continue with these criminal charges, I will have no choice but to defend myself in court. My lawyer says that we can prove the evidence against me was fabricated or taken out of context. We can also show that you have been harassing and stalking me, which forced me to take defensive action. Sarah couldn't believe that Maggie was threatening her from jail. I have witnesses who will testify that you made threats against me and my family. I also have evidence that you have been spying on me and other neighbors with illegal surveillance equipment. If this case goes to trial, the truth about your behavior will come out. The letter ended with a final demand. I expect you to make a decision about my bail within the next few days. Every day that I spend in jail makes this situation worse for both of us. I hope you will make the right choice and help us both move forward." It was signed, "Your neighbor, Margaret Henderson." Sarah sat in her living room holding the letter and feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and fear, even from jail. Maggie was still trying to control and manipulate her. Sarah immediately called her lawyer, Ms. Santos, and read the entire letter over the phone. "This letter is actually great evidence for our case," Ms. Santos said. "It shows that Ms. Henderson is trying to intimidate you and interfere with the criminal prosecution. That's another felony called obstruction of justice. But what if she really does have witnesses who will lie for her in court?" Sarah asked. "She got people to lie to the police before. The difference is that now we have video evidence of her pouring gasoline on your house," Ms. Santos replied. "It doesn't matter what witnesses say when there's clear video." "Proof of attempted arson," Mrs. Santos advised Sarah to give the letter to Detective Johnson and not to respond to Maggie in any way. But Maggie wasn't finished trying to get Sarah's attention. The next day, Sarah received another phone call from Robert Henderson. "Sarah, I know my wife sent you a letter," Robert said. "I want you to know that I didn't approve of that letter. Maggie wrote it without talking to me first." "Your wife is threatening me from jail," Sarah replied. "She's trying to intimidate me into dropping the charges." "I know, and I'm sorry," Robert said. "But Sarah, I'm begging you to consider helping us with the bail money. Maggie is not doing well in jail. She's having panic attacks and isn't eating. I'm worried about her mental health." Sarah felt some sympathy for Robert, but she was still angry about the situation. "Robert, your wife tried to burn down my house with me inside it," Sarah said firmly. "She's been harassing me for months, destroying my property and lying to police. Now she's threatening me from jail. I will not help her get out." "What if she agrees to move away permanently?" Robert asked desperately. "What if we sell our house and leave the neighborhood? Would you consider dropping the charges then?" Sarah thought about this offer. Part of her just wanted Maggie to go away and leave her alone. But she also thought about all the other families that Maggie had hurt over the years. "Robert, this isn't just about me anymore," Sarah said. "Your wife has been terrorizing families for years. She needs to face consequences for her actions, or she'll just move somewhere else and do the same thing to other people." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I understand your point," he said finally. "But she's my wife. I have to try to help her." After Robert hung up, Sarah felt sad for him but firm in her decision. She wasn't going to let Maggie escape justice by paying her bail or dropping the charges. That evening, Sarah decided to share Maggie's letter with her neighbors. She made copies and went door to door, showing people exactly what kind of person they had been living. The neighbors were shocked and angry when they read Maggie's attempt to manipulate Sarah into paying her bail. "This woman is completely crazy," said Janet from down the street. "She tried to kill you and now she wants you to pay for her freedom." "We should make sure everyone in the neighborhood knows about this," said Tom. "People need to understand what kind of person Maggie really is." By the end of the week, Maggie's letter had been shared with most of the neighborhood. People were disgusted by her audacity and her attempt to avoid responsibility for her crimes. Sarah also shared the letter on social media, and it quickly went viral. Thousands of people shared it as an example of extreme entitlement and narcissism. Local news stations picked up the story and interviewed Sarah about her experience. The headline on one news report was, "HOA president tries to burn down neighbor's house, then demands victim pay her bail." Sarah felt good knowing that Maggie's true character was being exposed to the whole community. Now everyone would know what kind of person they were dealing with. But Sarah also knew that Maggie would be even more angry when she found out about all the publicity. The trial was still coming, and Sarah wondered what other tricks Maggie might try from her jail cell. The viral attention from Maggie's bail demand letter brought unexpected results. Within days of the story spreading on social media, Sarah received calls from victims in other neighborhoods where Maggie had lived. "I saw your story on the news," said a woman named Linda Chen. "Margaret Henderson terrorized my family when she lived in Westfield Estates 5 years ago. She did the exact same things to us that she did to you." Over the next week, Sarah heard from 6 more families from Maggie's previous neighborhoods. Each family had a similar story of harassment, false complaints, and intimidation tactics. Some had been too scared to report Maggie to police at the time, while others had tried but couldn't prove their cases. Detective Johnson was very interested in these new witnesses. This establishes a clear pattern of criminal behavior going back over a decade, he told Sarah. It makes our case even stronger. The prosecutor assigned to Maggie's case was also impressed by the evidence. With all this documentation and the video of the attempted arson, this is one of the strongest cases I've seen, she told Sarah and Miss Santos, but the attention also brought some unexpected support for Maggie. A few people online claimed that Sarah was exaggerating the story for attention, and some neighbors who had been afraid to cross Maggie now spoke up in her defense. Margaret was always very helpful to me, said Mrs. Ellis, an elderly woman from the next block. She helped me understand the HOA rules when I first moved here. I think this whole thing has been blown out of proportion. However, these supporters quickly changed their minds when more evidence came to light. The prosecutor's office obtained a search warrant for Maggie's house, and what they found shocked everyone. In Maggie's home office, police discovered detailed files on every neighbor in the community. The files contained photographs of people's houses, notes about their daily schedules, copies of their mail, and even personal information like where they worked and what cars they drove. Most disturbing of all, Maggie had been taking pictures through people's windows at night. She had hundreds of photos showing neighbors inside their homes, often in private moments with their families. This woman was conducting surveillance on the entire neighborhood, Detective Johnson told Sarah. Some of this behavior could be classified as stalking multiple people. The search also revealed that Maggie had been stealing mail from neighbors' mailboxes to gather personal information about them. Police found stacks of opened letters and packages that belonged to other people. When this new evidence became public, even Maggie's strongest supporters in the neighborhood turned against her. I had no idea she was spying on all of us, said Mrs. Ellis, the elderly woman who had defended Maggie. I feel violated and scared. What kind of person does these things? The trial began 4 months later. Sarah was nervous about testifying, but the prosecutor assured her that the evidence was overwhelming. Maggie's lawyer tried to argue that she was mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. They claimed that stress and anxiety had caused her to behave irrationally. My client is a dedicated community volunteer who became overly concerned about neighborhood standards, her lawyer said. Her actions were misguided, but they came from a desire to help her community, not to hurt anyone. But the prosecutor presented a clear picture of calculated criminal behavior spanning many years. This defendant engaged in a systematic campaign of harassment, intimidation, and surveillance, the prosecutor told the jury. She destroyed property, filed false police reports, and ultimately tried to burn down an occupied house. This was not the behavior of someone who was temporarily stressed. This was the behavior of someone who enjoyed controlling and terrorizing other people. Sarah testified about the months of harassment and the night Maggie tried to burn down her house. She was calm and clear as she described each incident and presented the evidence. The most powerful moment came when the prosecutor played the security camera video of Maggie pouring gasoline on Sarah's house. The jury watched in shocked silence as Maggie systematically spread flammable liquid around the foundation and walls. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor said, you can see with your own eyes that this defendant intended to burn down Ms. Miller's house while she was sleeping inside. This was not a misunderstanding or a mental health crisis. This was attempted murder. Maggie's lawyer tried to claim that she was only trying to clean up spilled chemicals, but the video evidence was too clear. The jury could see Maggie carefully pouring liquid from a gas can and looking around to make sure no one was watching. The other victims from previous neighborhoods also testified about Maggie's harassment campaigns. Their stories showed a clear pattern of behavior that had been going on for over 10 years. The trial lasted 2 weeks. When it was over, the jury took less than 3 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty on all counts, the judge announced. Maggie showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but her husband Robert broke down crying in the courtroom. At the sentencing hearing, several neighbors spoke about how Maggie's actions had affected their lives. Maria Rodriguez, the mother whose family had been forced to move away, gave the most emotional testimony. This woman destroyed my children's sense of safety in their own home, she said through tears. My youngest daughter still has nightmares about the mean lady who used to watch our house. Sarah also spoke at the sentencing. Maggie Henderson turned what should have been a peaceful neighborhood into a place of fear and anxiety, she said. She used her position of authority to bully and intimidate families who just wanted to live in peace. Her actions affected not just me, but dozens of people over many years. The judge sentenced Maggie to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. She also received a permanent restraining order that prevented her from contacting any of her victims. Ms. Henderson, your actions show a complete disregard for other people's rights and safety, the judge said. You terrorized multiple families and communities over many years. The fact that you attempted to burn down an occupied house shows how dangerous you had become. This sentence reflects the seriousness of your crimes and the need to protect the community from your behavior. After the sentencing, Sarah felt a huge sense of relief. The nightmare that had started with a simple violation notice about her trash can was finally over. But the story had one more important chapter. With Maggie gone, the neighborhood needed new HOA leadership. Sarah organized a proper election following the original charter rules that Maggie had ignored for years. The neighbors elected Tom as the new HOA president, and Sarah agreed to serve as vice president. Together, they completely changed how the HOA operated. They eliminated most of the petty rules that Maggie had used to harass people. They focused on real issues like street maintenance and neighborhood safety, instead of measuring people's grass height and counting their packages. Most importantly, they established clear limits on HOA authority and created an appeals process for any violations. No one person would ever again have the power to terrorize families the way Maggie had done. Robert Henderson sold the house across from Sarah and moved away while Maggie was in prison. He left a note apologizing to all the neighbors and saying that he planned to divorce Maggie and start a new life somewhere else. Sarah finally got to enjoy the peaceful neighborhood life she had always wanted. She replanted her vegetable garden and invited neighbors over for barbecues featuring homegrown tomatoes and peppers. The community became the friendly, welcoming place it was supposed to be. 3 years later, when Maggie was released from prison, she was required to move at least 50 miles away from any of her victims. She was also required to register as a stalker and undergo mandatory mental health treatment. Sarah heard through local news that Maggie tried to move to another neighborhood with an HOA, but her criminal record made it impossible for her to gain any position of authority. The days of terrorizing innocent families were over. Sarah kept the security cameras on her house, but now she used them to capture happy moments like neighborhood children playing in the street and families walking their dogs in the evening. The cameras that had once recorded criminal harassment now recorded the sounds of laughter and normal neighborhood life. On quiet evenings, Sarah would sit on her front porch and look across the street at the house where Maggie used to live. New neighbors had moved in, a young couple with a baby who waved to Sarah every morning and brought her fresh-baked cookies. Sometimes, Sarah thought about how different things could have been if she had let Maggie drive her away, like all the other families. But she was glad she had fought back and stood up for herself and her community. The neighborhood was finally at peace, and Sarah had found the safe, happy home she had always dreamed of having.